Morning, Izzy. You had a nice yontif? When you going to Calgary?
Probably this week, next week. I would suspect probably Tuesday.
It's not week starting already.
July, I think. That's it. I need to get a hat.
Boots. Yeah.
Okay, we're almost ready. Lovely, yeah. Weather was perfect.
And so you came in.
Yeah, they're leaving today. They're going to Montreal for a Simcha. Okay, so let's get started. We had this question on, let's see, when did we last learn? On Tuesday, right? Today's Friday. So Tuesday, we just learned the shaila. The shaila was that a person is a tenant in an apartment building, and he explicitly, when he signed the lease agreement, accepted responsibility for fire and other damage to the apartment, including fire. Lo aleinu, he says, the apartment caught fire. He doesn't explain whose fault it was, doesn't explain in the shaila, the circumstances, and the landlord is demanding payment for damages. But he also discovers, this tenant, that the landlord is insured for fire insurance. So he's going to be compensated by the insurance company. So does he have an obligation to pay? So this is going to involve, I guess, complicated issues. What's the word? Is it subrogation? Is that the word, Marv? Where the insurance company will come after the guilty party?
Yeah, you could involve subrogation if the landlord has the right to sue the tenant and there's insurance, then the landlord's insurer has a subrogated right to step into its insured's shoes and then claim over against the at-fault party. That's the concept of insurance. The other issue here is collateral benefits, which I gave a little article on that on the WhatsApp. But what that means is normally the at-fault party would be sued by the landlord for negligence, and you'd have a right to sue the tenant for the risk that they assumed in the lease, let's say, right, for this risk. So you could sue them. And then directly, and the tenant would have an obligation to make the landlord whole, no more, no less, but and not get double recovery, which is what this insurance policy on the side would involve.
Right.
So, except in the secular law, there's an exception to double recovery. If you have an insurance policy that's outside of the lease. So if the landlord had the foresight to say, I want to get my own private insurance to cover this, because you never know, and it's not in the lease, which it seems in this case it was not, then the landlord could have double recovery because there's an insurance exception.
Right. So basically, I mean, I guess double recovery could apply. Is it possible, is it permitted according to law, Canadian law, to take 2 insurance policies, 3 insurance policies on the same property, and then just collect as many times as you'd like?
Once it was having 3 life insurance policies, it's the same thing.
Well, right. I mean, so Moish is arguing, well, you can take as many life insurance policies as you like and just collect more and more money, Is it permissible to do that on property?
Anybody can take a life insurance policy on somebody else.
On somebody else's.
Yeah.
You can sell your life insurance
Yeah.
policy that.
Yeah, and insurance policies on life are transferable. So do you know what the PSOC is, Marv, in Canadian law? Can I take multiple insurance policies?
Yeah, you could have different insurance policies, but I'm not sure amongst the insurers, how it works. There's other issues about priority of who pays what and all that. But yeah, on the face of it, you could take more than one policy out.
I think that the insurance companies will get together and they'll only pay a third. The three insurance companies, they'll only pay a third of each.
So Barry is arguing that if you take out 3 insurance policies, each company will pay out a third.
They're limited liability.
It's a limited liability.
Yeah.
Okay, well, all right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you do collect, often there is a deductible, and so you could have where you took out insurance, but you could have a $3,000 deductible, so you can still end up out $3,000.
Right. The presumption would be, and we'll probably get a chance to see this hopefully inside. The presumption is going to be that the tenant, if he accepted liability, he's the responsible party to make the landlord whole to whatever degree the insurance company doesn't. The question is the landlord entitled to double collection, both from the tenant and from the insurance company? So, but it would seem that certainly we're working under the assumption that the tenant has liability at least to cover the deductible. Does he have to go beyond the deductible?
And his insurance is going to go up as well.
Right. Well, that might be considered causative damage, right? The fact that his insurance policy is going to go up, his premium will go up. Yeah, it's very hard to quantify how much damage I've caused you by making your premiums go up. Okay.
The one issue, Rabbi, you just raised is if the insurance issue is stipulated in the lease, not outside the lease, which this Shaila seems to involve on one level, but if the tenant in the lease has assumed liability for this, and let's say agreed to say, I'm going to take insurance out for this risk of fire or whatever it is, then the tenant is responsible to the insurance company will pay, and that's that, right? But if it's the other way, if the landlord in the lease agreed to take insurance out, then the landlord assumed the risk of this fire, and the landlord's insurance company will pay for this fire, and the landlord would not be able to sue the tenant for the damage, nor would the landlord's insurance company have a subrogated claim because they have no greater rights than the landlord. So, but that I don't think is what the shaila is.
Here it says v'kibalti achrayut al kol hanezikim sheyu b'dira kolel sreifa. I accepted in the lease that I would be responsible for any damage to the apartment, including fire.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right, let's.
Exactly, insurance that he's not saying that he has an insurance policy, right? He's just taking responsibility.
Right, he's taking responsibility. Now, a tenant who assumes responsibility would be wise to take a fire insurance policy, but it sounds like he didn't. Okay.
So just like
And that could be hundreds of thousands.
We have a tenant, in Israel, and the lawyer insisted that both the landlord and the tenant get their own policy.
That's what we have.
Landlord and the tenant have to get their both policies.
Yeah.
So
what Mar was saying, that once the guilty party would claim, and it would probably be the tenant because he's the one that somehow is more close to the fire, and the landlord would not be able to take claim on that. So there would be no double guilt, so to speak.
So then what's the point of getting 2 policies?
I guess it depends on maybe the amounts. But I
Specific things in the house or.
Yeah, is one contents and one the
One
building?
is building, one is contents, there's different
But
insurance.
they do cover, they will overlap for sure.
Maybe the other one will cover the deductible.
Uh-huh. Okay,
Different policies anyway.
interesting.
I just know in Israel, I have insurance on my place and my tenant has insurance.
I'm just curious, when you get like an Airbnb, is fire insurance covered?
Wouldn't that be like a hotel? You don't pay for fire in a hotel. You rent and go. It's
Right,
one day.
right.
I don't think you would.
I wonder if you invalidate a fire insurance policy if you use your home as an Airbnb. That's it. I don't even know what the laws are in this case. Okay, let's take a look at the tshuva. Otherwise, we'll be schmoozing the whole day. Kasav ha'or sameach. So the Or Sameach writes, "B'mikre kazeh shahaya lefanav." That's Or Sameach lives in the 19th century, and he discusses this kind of question. V'toan hasocher she'al das zeh shehamasker yekabel es hakesef mimakom acher lo kibel alav achrayut. And the renter argues as follows: yes, I accepted liability, but not if you were going to be getting a replacement for the damage for from somewhere else. For that, I didn't accept liability. So the argument that the renter is or the tenant is making is, why should I have to pay if you're already getting paid by the insurance company? Because of Or Sameach shafilu hachi hasocher chayav l'shalem. And the Or Sameach says that nonetheless, the tenant or the renter is obligated to pay. And he brings proof from the Gemara in Bava Kama. Shotaf nahar chamoro v'chamar chavero. I think we saw this case. A river comes and like a rapids comes and washes away my donkey and my donkey's and my friend's donkey. Chamoro shel chavero shava masayim, v'chamor shelo shava meya. So my friend's donkey is worth 200. My donkey is worth 100. V'hu yachol lahatzil rak echad mehem. And you can only save one donkey. So which donkey should you save? Ubikesh lahatzil es shel chavero sheshava masayim. So he quickly turns to his friend. He says, Yankel, I can save only one donkey. Do you want me to save your donkey and you'll owe me 100? Right? So Vahaisa haskama beinehem. And Yankel says, sure, do it. Just save my 200 ruble donkey. So chayev l'shalim lo demei chamoro. So in that case, Yankel is going to be chayev to pay for my donkey. V'hagemara shamdana ma yiyadin imhu hitzil es hachamor shel chaver sheshava masayim v'chamor shelo sheshava meya ola me'elav chay v'kayim. And then the Gemara asks the follow-up question. Follow-up question is, what happens if I save Yankel's donkey? Oh, Baruch Hashem, I got your donkey, he's fine. No, I lost my donkey, so you'll pay me 100. Then all of a sudden, my donkey washes up a few hundred yards downstream, and he's fine. So it's a miracle. So does Yankel still owe me? Does Yankel still owe me $100? Okay, ve'elasa hagemara shafilu hachi chayev l'shalim no demei chamoro. And the Gemara says, yes, Yankel still has to pay me 100, right? Because he agreed that if I did this service for him, he would pay me 100. Heaven had mercy on me that I was able to retrieve my donkey alive, even though that was not anticipated. From that case, we can apply to our situation. The kamosha sham bala chamor sheshavim asayim chayiv l'shalim ala chamor sheshavim meya. He says, just like in that case, Yankel, who got his donkey saved and agreed to pay 100 for the salvation of his donkey, kevin shekibel alatzmo achrayazu ve'afal pisha besof hamatzil lo hipsidis chamero. Even though in the end, the guy who did the saving did not lose his own donkey. Mikol makom lo yachol lomar lo shal das kein lo hitchayavti lecha. But Yankel can't still, nonetheless, Yaakov cannot say, well, I never obligated myself with that in mind, that if you would be able to retrieve your donkey, that I would pay you 100. The yachol hamatzil lomar lo, why? Because the saver, the guy who did the saving, can say to Yankel, Ma ichbat lach mehashamayim richamu alai. What do you care whether my donkey was retrieved in the end or not? Heaven had rachmanas on me. I won the lottery. I got my donkey back. But the fact is, you committed yourself to pay me 100 out of the service that I was providing for you, and it shouldn't make a difference whether my donkey is around or not.
It was based upon him retrieving his, that's not fair. He's getting his donkey back.
I know,
Right, so
but nonetheless,
The deal
when
is the deal.
when I made the deal with Yankel,
But the deal was made on the predicate on the fact
It
that his
wa-
donkey
right.
died. His
So-
donkey didn't die.
yeah. So in other words, Yankel basically obligated himself, basically saying, "I'll make you." So the question is, what did Yankel promise? He said, "I'll make you whole, or I'll give you the value of your donkey." Right? If he said, if his argument, if his agreement was, "I'll make you whole," that in the event that you lose your donkey, I'll pay you for the donkey loss. So then maybe the halacha would be different. But in the case of the Gemara, Yankel said, whatever if you go ahead and save my donkey, or if you go ahead and rent me the apartment, I will cover all damages that are covered in the apartment. Even so, it's not stipulated that I'll only cover the damages caused to the apartment if you cannot retrieve money from your insurance company, right? That was not the stipulation. It was a full assumption of liability. Okay, so that seems to be close to what the case of the Gemara is. Kol shekain b'mikra shalanu shuhu halach v'hotzi mikiso kesef levatech et atzmo shehasocher chayav l'shalem. And so certainly in a case like this, where the landlord went ahead and spent money to cover an insurance policy, that does not remove off of his tenant Yankel to pay for whatever he assumed liability for. Lachain, and therefore lahalacha, tzarech hasocher l'shalem kefi shehitchayev, afal pisha hamasker mekabel hakesef mehabituach. And therefore, halachically, the tenant has to pay for whatever the value of the damage is, even if the landlord is getting money from the insurance company. So I guess it would have to be stipulated explicitly in the lease agreement if there's going to be any exclusions to that liability. Now let's take a look at some of the footnoting in the Makor Baruch. So he writes, "Hashe'ela nish'ala dafka b'chi hagavna shahasoicher kibel alasmo achrayut sreifu chedome." This shaila is being asked only in a scenario where the tenant has accepted upon himself liability for fire and the like. Ki belize hare karkot nitmatu midine shmira vafilu bipshia kideisa b'shulchan aruch. Because you'll recall, based on our previous tshuva and the last few tshuvas, that a person who is a tenant, is what's called a socher, a renter, is, if when it comes to real estate, he's exempt for being liable for real estate, even in cases of negligence. Remember, we did learn that in the Gemara, based on the klal uprat uklal, that the pasuk says that the shomer's liability is only for chattel and for things that have intrinsic value, but not for real estate. And yes, it's true. We're talking about an apartment building, so it's not in the ground, but it's attached to the ground. And things that were originally detached and then were attached to the ground, kvar kasaf haramad yesh omrim v'tolu shel basov chiru b'karka lavka karka dami v'yesh cholkin v'lachenim shol bayis v'nisraf poter milashalim ad kan l'shana. And the Ramah writes that in a situation like that, the socher could say, well, I paskin like the opinion that says that anything that was detached but then attached to real estate has the status of real estate, and therefore he can exempt himself. The kol shekin lefi mashakasav hashach sham shabayis l'kuli alma havika karka, and the Shach comments there and says even the Ramah will agree that the walls themselves and the actual structure of the house definitely has the status of karka. It's only a machlokus of, let's say, fixtures, but the house itself has the status of real estate. He says, but the bottom line is, even though the Choshen, he says, deliberates over what the Shach writes, but at the end of the day, that's the psak halacha, that you're a shomer or a socher is not liable for damage to an apartment unless it's explicitly written in the lease agreement. So, just to repeat what we've said all along, make sure there's clear documentation as to who's liable for what. Whenever you're entering into an agreement, whether it's a tenant-landlord agreement or whether it's a purchase agreement, whatever the agreement is, make sure that liability for the goods is or the house is clearly documented. Now that Rav Sharaga has paskined that the tenant will be liable, even when the Balabayas is collecting from insurance, he says, Omnam ayin b'shut harei b'samim, shehevi raya meha gemara hanal b'diuk lahefech. He says, there's another sefer, harei b'samim, who brings the opposite proof from the very same Gemara. He says, the dafka hasam chayav, the berega shetava chamoro shalamatzl b'mayim, hasheni yitchayev l'shalem lo. And the reason why the case is different in the Gemara is because the very moment that the two donkeys were drowning in the river, that's when Yankel went ahead and promised that he'll cover the value of the saver's donkey. So really, at that moment, when the guy would, let's say I am the guy saving Yankel's donkey. At the moment when Yankel promised me to pay me 100, it was I made my donkey hefker. And so when I retrieved my donkey, because I never thought I would ever, I had Yeush on my donkey. I never thought I would ever be able to retrieve him. So when I end up retrieving miraculously my donkey, who did 20 somersaults in the rapids, and everyone thought that he was a goner. And then all of a sudden he just, he's like Donkey from Shrek. And all of a sudden he just comes out and he's fine, right? Right? It's not my donkey at that point. It's Hefker. So it's like I found something that never belonged to me that's worth $100 and I got it, right? So that's the reason why I get to keep both Yankel's $100 and my donkey. Masha'en kain b'bayit mevutak. But in a dira, an apartment that is insured by an insurance company, at no point did the landlord ever lose the house and make it hefker, right? It's just that just because the insurance company is paying for the damage, it's not like the landlord is retrieving something from hefker. So it is different. And for that reason, the Sefer Harei B'Samim argues just to the contrary, that the person whose house got burnt down or the dira got burnt and damaged, he doesn't collect from the tenant if he's collecting from the insurance company. He says, I refer you to that shuva where he writes that in an insured home, a person has never been damaged to be out of money because all along he had this safety net of an insurance policy. And so we don't consider to him to be an injured or a party who was caused to be have property damage. Masha'en kein b'chol hadugmaot mehashas she'evi sham shemashma l'chayev b'kulam ayri shahaya nezek mitchila ve'achar kachu shlam nizka. Whereas all of the cases that are brought by the Gemara, the owner incurs loss and then he retrieves that loss. Aval bebayit mevutach me'olam lo haya nezek keven shabituach mishalem lo ve'al ken keven she'eno mafsid asarif patur ad kan tochen devarav. He says, but in the case of an insured home, at no point was the owner of the home, the homeowner, at no point was he really out of money, out of pocket. He never lost anything because the safety net of the insurance company maintains his financial security throughout the entire period. So yeah, that the dira got burned and it sustained significant damage that is in the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. But at the same time, the guy can sit back and relax because the insurance company is going to be covering everything. So there's no feeling of being out of pocket. There's no feeling of loss. And there really is no, in reality, loss because the insurance company is covering everything as it's in real time as it's happening. That's the argument of the Harei B'Samim to argue with the psak of Rav Sharaga. Go ahead, Moshe.
So, I mentioned this before, if you lose something and you collect it on the insurance and then you find it, according to this, you wouldn't have to return the money.
Not necessarily. That case is not really analogous because the insurance company, when they insure, let's say, a diamond necklace, they insure it against loss. But you can't just go to the insurance company and say, I still have my wife's necklace, but I want you to pay for it.
What if you lost it?
Yeah, so I lost it and then I found it. So you're saying, but I got it back from Hefker. But I think that the insurance company will say, no, we only insured it if it was lost permanently. That's probably in the rider, in the clause in the insurance policy, that's the insurance company's stipulation. But I hear your argument. You're saying that it was lost and it was Hefker because it was in Rishus Harabim. I had Yeyush, and now that I found it, it's not like I found something that always belonged to me. I found it and it was Hefker. So why can't I make the insurance company pay? The answer is the insurance company isn't studying Bava Metzia, right? In other words, they're not going to know from Hefker, not Hefker, right? The argument but at the end of the day, they're going to say we only covered a diamond necklace that was permanently lost. If you happen to find it later, you have to give us back the money. But the analogy, however, is knowing that the insurance company is always going to make me whole means that I was never really, I never incurred any financial loss because of the apartment burning down, which is a little bit hard to hear, to be quite honest. And anyway, and that's what the Makor Baruch he's going to challenge it. He says, Amnam dvarav tzarachian, the harei gam bebayit shenisraf, harei miyad shenisraf yitchayev hasocher b'nizkav. He says, because once the apartment burns down or the house burns down, as soon as it burns down, the tenant has assumed liability. V'rak achar kach k'shahamasker pana lechevrat habituach im rayot v'chayotze bo maso matan ad shehiskimu l'shalem et hanezek rak az hu shlam niskal. And it's not like the insurance company is right there as the smoke is still coming out of the damaged apartment, ready to write a check. It takes time. The tenant becomes liable immediately because of his commitment, and the insurance company you got to handle with. You got to call them. They have to send out an inspector. They have to deal with whether or not this was included in the policy or not included in the policy, and only then does the landlord become whole from the insurance company. Nimtza de dinze doime lahahi the chamor. So it really is like the case of the donkey, where there was that moment where the landlord was really out of his apartment, at least thinking that he was out of his apartment, because there's no guarantee that the insurance company is going to pay. And even if you feel pretty secure that they are, you have to go through a process in order to retrieve payment. Od ra'inu laharav pitchei Choshen. And Rav Bloy in his Pischei Choshen also Shetama ala Shut Harei B'Samim Hanal also challenges this Harei B'Samim psak. He says De'eich Ratza Lilmod Liftor Et HaSocher Me'ahi Chamor. Why did you think that you would exempt the tenant based on the case in the Gemara of the donkey? Dahahasa me'achar shala chamor me'ela v'itbarer l'mafreya shemei olam lo haya nezek. Because it turns out in the case of the donkey that retroactively there was no damage to the guy who's saving his friend's donkey. And that's why you need this novel idea that the guy who's saving Yankel's donkey can say, that's got no bearing on your obligation to me if heaven decided to have rachamim on me and save my donkey. He says, when an insurance company pays for damage, this is not to suggest that there was no damage, that there was no financial loss to the landlord. But it's really that there was damage. He's out of an apartment, and the insurance company promises to make him whole. But he is out of pocket. He says this is no different from a person who was damaged. His property was damaged, let's say by a guy, a kid was playing baseball in the neighborhood, hits a wild ball and it goes through my window and it breaks my window. And before I have a chance to really get an estimate, my cousin Vinny, who's in the glass business, replaces the window.
Your cousin Vinny.
My cousin Vinny, who's in the glass business, goes ahead and replaces the window. He says, what are you going to say? That now the kid who broke the window doesn't have to pay because of cousin Vinny? That doesn't make any sense. You still have to pay for the window that you broke, even though my cousin did it for me for free as a favor, doesn't let you off the hook for paying for damages. So that's the basis for the psak. What, just because I was able to be smart enough to figure out how to cover how to protect myself from your damage means that you're exempt from your liability? That, to me, is a very good analogy, right? Rav Bloy's analogy. He doesn't say my cousin Vinny, but I just threw that in anyway. Okay. Yeah. Anyway. All right. So that's the psak. Marv, any last words?
That would accord exactly, especially Rav Lau's analysis would accord exactly with the current secular law, which would make a distinction between the landlord getting insurance within the lease, in which case it wouldn't matter if the tenant was responsible or not. If the landlord got tenants or landlord insurance in the lease and the tenant knew that and that was the obligation, the landlord's insurance would pay and that would be the end of it. And you wouldn't be able to sue the tenant. In the case that we talked about, the secular law would say if the landlord had he had the foresight to think of getting insurance outside of the landlord-tenant relationship on his own, he's a smart guy, and then the tenant has to pay. He can be sued, he has to pay, and that collateral benefit, the double recovery that the landlord would get from his private insurance or from his cousin Vinny or a rich father-in-law or a GoFundMe says you raise money, from public funds or something like this, and he was made whole, he still could go after the tenant for the damage the tenant assumed liability for, despite those two things, the private insurance exception and the private money that comes in, through whatever source, a family member, GoFundMe. Then he could get double recovery.
All right, Shkoyach, thank you, everyone. Have a great Shabbos, and we'll pick it up in Mitzvah Shem on Monday. Take care.